If you enjoyed this podcast, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing to the channel. Sharing it with your friends and family helps spread knowledge, and when we help others grow, we grow too. Thank you so much for listening. Let's dive into the podcast. The night of intrusion, the break-in at Watergate. The clock struck past midnight on June 17th, 1972. Washington slept, but inside the Watergate complex, something strange was happening. 5 men moved through the shadows of the 6th floor, their footsteps muffled on the carpeted halls. Frank Wills made his rounds as the night security guard. He had walked these halls countless times before. Nothing ever happened here, just another quiet night at the office building. But as he checked the basement parking garage, something caught his eye. A piece of tape covered the lock on a door. Someone had placed it there to keep the door from closing completely. Wills pulled it off and went about his duties. Strange, but maybe a worker had forgotten to remove it. An hour later, he found the tape again. Someone had replaced it. His heart began to race. This was not normal. This was not an accident. Wills called the police. Within minutes, 3 officers arrived at the building. They rode the elevator up to the 8th floor, where the Democratic Party had their offices. The hallway was dark and empty, but behind one door, they could see the glow of flashlights moving around inside. The officers drew their guns and burst through the door. 5 men stood frozen in the office. They wore business suits and rubber gloves. On the desk lay rolls of cash, camera equipment, and small electronic devices that looked like nothing the police had seen before. The men surrendered without a fight. They gave false names and claimed to be security consultants. But their story made no sense. Why would security guards break into an office at night? Why did they carry so much cash? What were those strange electronic boxes? As dawn broke over Washington, word spread quickly through the city. 5 men had been caught red-handed inside the Democratic headquarters. The morning newspapers would call it a third-rate burglary, but the police knew they had stumbled onto something much bigger. The burglars' backgrounds slowly came to light. James McCord had worked for the CIA for nearly 20 years. Bernard Barker had connections to anti-Castro groups in Miami. Eugenio Martinez had ties to mysterious government operations. These were not ordinary criminals. More questions arose with each passing hour. How did they get past security? Who sent them? What were they really looking for inside those offices? The equipment they carried could tap phone lines and photograph documents. This was the work of professionals. By evening, reporters had traced connections that reached deep into the White House itself. Phone numbers in the burglars' address books led to men who worked for President Nixon's campaign. Money in their pockets came from bank accounts linked to political operations. What had started as a simple break-in was becoming something else entirely. Something that would shake the very foundations of American politics. The truth was just beginning to emerge from the shadows. Silent warnings, the launch of a cover-up. The phone rang at dawn on June 18, 1972. In the White House, men in expensive suits gathered around polished tables. Their faces were tight with worry. Something had gone terribly wrong at the Watergate. John Dean paced the carpet. His mind raced through options like a chess player, seeing 10 moves ahead. The burglars sat in jail cells, but they knew too much. H.R. Haldeman tapped his fingers on the mahogany desk. John Ehrlichman stared out the window at the morning light creeping across Washington. They had hours, maybe days, before reporters started asking harder questions. The FBI would dig deeper. Connections would surface. Names would be spoken in courtrooms. Dean picked up the phone first. His voice was calm, steady. He spoke in code to men who understood the language of silence. Money would flow to the right places. Families would be taken care of. Loyalty would be rewarded. In another room, Haldeman made different calls. The CIA owed favors. Old friendships could be tested. National security was a powerful phrase that could stop investigations cold. He spoke to men who lived in shadows, who understood that some secrets protected the nation. The tapes rolled in hidden machines. Every whispered conversation was captured on thin strips of magnetic film. These men, so careful with their public words, spoke freely in their private chambers. They believed these walls would keep their secrets safe. Boxes of documents disappeared from offices. Shredders hummed through the night like mechanical insects. Paper trails that led to campaign funds and slush money turned to confetti. Phone records vanished. Meeting logs were rewritten. Campaign officials received visits from serious men in dark cars. Stories were rehearsed. Testimonies were aligned. Everyone would remember the same version of events. The truth became flexible, shaped like clay in skilled hands. But something strange happened in those first desperate days. The harder they pushed to contain the secret, the more it seemed to spread. Reporters sensed blood in the water. FBI agents asked questions that cut too close to protected ground. The public watched their television screens with growing suspicion. Why were so many important people claiming they knew nothing? Why did simple answers lead to more complex questions? Deep in government vaults, other files held other secrets. Men who had worked in intelligence for decades recognized the patterns. This was how cover-ups began. First came the lies, then came the lies about the lies. The seeds of something much larger than a hotel break-in were already growing in the dark soil of deception. Cracks in the facade. McCord's letter and Sirica's gamble. The letter arrived on a quiet Friday morning in March 1973. Judge John Sirica held the envelope in his weathered hands, not knowing he was about to read words that would shake the government to its foundation. James McCord sat in his prison cell, staring at blank paper for hours before he began to write. The former CIA operative had kept silent for months. The pressure was crushing him. His co-conspirators whispered threats in the shadows. Money changed hands. Promises were made and broken. But something snapped inside McCord that day. His pen moved across the page with steady purpose. Word by word, he spelled out the truth that powerful men desperately wanted buried. There was perjury in the courtroom. Witnesses had lied under oath. People were being paid to stay quiet. The break-in was not the work of a few rogue operatives. Higher-ups were involved, much higher. When Sirica read those lines, the courthouse seemed to hold its breath. The judge had suspected something was wrong from the very beginning. The burglars acted too organized, too professional. Their silence felt rehearsed. Their lawyers appeared too well-funded for common criminals. Now McCord was confirming his worst fears. The letter landed on newspaper desks within hours. Reporters who had been digging for months suddenly found their biggest source imaginable. Not some anonymous tip or leaked document, but a signed confession from someone who was actually there. The White House erupted into chaos behind closed doors. Phone calls flew between offices. Urgent meetings were called and canceled. Officials who had been sleeping soundly for months now paced their offices at midnight, wondering what McCord might say next. Meanwhile, senators who had been watching from the sidelines realized they could no longer ignore the growing storm. The American people deserved answers. Television cameras would bring those answers directly into living rooms across the country. Judge Sirica saw his chance. He had spent decades on the bench, but this case would define his legacy. He pushed harder. He demanded more testimony. He refused to accept the neat little package that prosecutors had tried to present. McCord's letter was just the beginning. Other conspirators watched nervously as their wall of silence began to crumble. If McCord could talk, what was stopping them? The money felt less important when prison sentences stretched ahead. In a matter of weeks, what started as a simple burglary had grown into something much larger and more dangerous. The break-in was no longer the story. The cover-up had become the real crime, and it reached straight to the most powerful office in America. The facade was falling apart, piece by piece. Taped betrayals, the president's secret recordings. The phone rang on a quiet Tuesday morning. Alexander Butterfield picked it up, not knowing he was about to change history. A Senate investigator asked him a simple question. Did President Nixon keep records of his meetings? Butterfield paused. His throat went dry. Yes, he said slowly. The president recorded everything. The room fell silent when Butterfield spoke those words to the Senate committee. Cameras flashed. Reporters scribbled notes frantically. For months, senators had wondered what really happened behind closed doors. Now they knew someone had been listening all along. Nixon had installed a secret system in the Oval Office. Hidden microphones caught every whispered conversation, every phone call, every meeting about the break-in. The machines had been running for years, capturing thousands of hours of private talks between the most powerful people in America. The tapes held secrets that could destroy presidencies. Late-night conversations about silencing witnesses, discussions about paying money to keep people quiet, plans to stop the FBI from digging deeper. All of it was there, preserved on magnetic tape. Nixon's lawyers fought like cornered animals. They claimed executive privilege. They said the president's private conversations were sacred. No court could force him to hand over the tapes. The Constitution protected him. Prosecutors disagreed. They needed those recordings to prove their case. Subpoenas flew back and forth. Judges weighed the power of presidents against the demands of justice. The battle raged for months while America watched. Then came the most damaging tape of all. 6 days after the break-in, Nixon sat in his office with his chief of staff. Their conversation was crystal clear. The president ordered the CIA to stop the FBI investigation. He knew about the cover-up from the very beginning. This was the smoking gun everyone had searched for. Not rumors or speculation, not witness testimony that could be questioned. Here was Nixon's own voice, caught on his own recording system, ordering the obstruction of justice. The words hit like thunder. How could the president claim innocence when his own tapes proved his guilt? The man who had sworn to uphold the law had broken it in the most serious way possible. Public trust shattered completely. The recordings showed that nothing was as it seemed. Every denial had been a lie. Every promise of transparency had been hollow. The president had betrayed not just the law, but the faith of every American who believed in him. The tapes became Nixon's downfall, turned by his own secretive nature into the weapon that would destroy his presidency. Erased evidence. The 18.5 minutes and judicial battles. HTML. The phone rang in a small office on a quiet Friday evening in November 1973. Judge John Sirica picked up the receiver and heard words that would shake the nation. Your Honor, we found something strange on the tape. What they found was silence. Not just any silence, but 18.5 minutes of it. Right in the middle of a conversation between President Nixon and his chief of staff. The tape that should have held their words about Watergate had been mysteriously erased. Rosemary Woods sat nervously in the witness chair. For 18 years, she had been Nixon's loyal secretary. Now, she had to explain how those crucial minutes disappeared. She demonstrated her theory, stretching awkwardly across her desk, one foot on a pedal, one hand reaching for the phone. The courtroom watched in disbelief. I might have accidentally held the erase button, she said, but experts shook their heads. The erasure showed multiple starts and stops. Someone had deliberately destroyed those words, and it took them more than a few seconds to do it. Technical investigators examined the tape under microscopes. They found evidence of at least 5 separate erasures. Each one had been carefully planned. This was no accident. Nixon's lawyers claimed executive privilege. They argued that a president's private conversations were sacred, protected from prying eyes. But Judge Sirica disagreed. The law applied to everyone, even presidents. The missing minutes became America's most famous silence. What had Nixon said that was so dangerous? What secrets were hidden in those erased words? Reporters asked these questions daily. Citizens wondered if their president was above the law. Then came the Saturday Night Massacre. Nixon ordered his attorney general to fire the special prosecutor investigating him. The attorney general refused and quit. Nixon asked the deputy attorney general. He also refused and quit. Finally, the third-ranking official did what Nixon wanted. Television screens across America showed the chaos. Justice Department officials walking out with boxes. Police cars surrounding government buildings. The country teetered on the edge of a constitutional crisis. The Supreme Court would soon have their say. In a unanimous decision, they ordered Nixon to hand over all his tapes. No president was above the law, they declared. But those 18.5 minutes remained silent forever. Whatever Nixon said that day died with the erasure. Some secrets stay buried, even when the truth comes out around them. The missing tape became more than evidence. It became a symbol of power, trying to hide from justice, and justice refusing to look away. Secrets out, the fall and enduring questions. The weight of secrets grew too heavy to carry. By the summer of 1974, the White House felt like a sinking ship. One by one, Nixon's closest advisors jumped overboard or were thrown into the churning waters of scandal. John Dean had already sung his song to Congress. Bob Haldeman and John Ehrlichman, once the most powerful men behind the throne, watched their careers crumble into dust. The president's inner circle became a ghost town of empty offices and hurried exits. Then came the tapes. Those mysterious recordings that Nixon had fought so hard to keep hidden finally saw daylight. What they revealed chilled even his supporters to the bone. The president's own voice caught plotting and scheming, planning cover-ups like a common criminal. On August 8, 1974, something unprecedented happened in American history. A president looked into television cameras and spoke words that had never been spoken before. "I shall resign the presidency, effective at noon tomorrow." The nation sat in stunned silence. Children asked their parents what it meant. Adults stared at their screens, trying to process the impossible. The most powerful man in the world was walking away in shame. But Nixon's resignation was just the beginning of a deeper mystery. Gerald Ford's pardon came swift and controversial. Why such haste? What conversations happened behind closed doors? Some wondered if deals were made in shadows, promises whispered in corridors of power. The trials that followed painted a picture of corruption that reached every corner of government. Yet for every answer the courts provided, two new questions emerged. Who really planned the break-in? How deep did the spy network go? Which secrets remained buried? Even today, decades later, boxes of files sit classified in government vaults. Researchers find gaps in records. Witnesses take their knowledge to graves. The complete truth about those dark operations may never fully emerge. The Watergate investigation changed journalism forever. Reporters became hunters, digging deeper than ever before. The public learned to question their leaders with new suspicion. Trust, once broken, proved harder to rebuild than anyone imagined. Democracy survived, but it bore scars. The mystery lingers in those missing 18.5 minutes of tape. It whispers in the names that were never called to testify. It hides in the files that remain sealed, waiting for someone brave enough to ask the right questions. Some secrets refuse to die, even when presidencies fall.